Hello, property investors. Welcome back to another session of our facilities management program that we do here for all of you. So getting into today's topic, we're talking about what to expect from my rental manager. And I say rental manager because it's quite easy to go property manager because there is a difference. And I think it's super important as property owners or investors, property investors, to be aware of the difference between someone who's a rental manager versus someone who's a property manager, facilities manager, operations manager, that sort of thing. So when it comes to a rental manager, I think the easiest way to really unpack your mindset around it is to think of a lease management element of it. So they get to manage your tenant relationship for you versus someone who's a property manager is looking after the full property. And that's why I also use that idea of a facilities manager and operations manager, because they're managing property itself. Very often in the real estate space, that name property manager, rental manager is interchangeable and it's just used across the board, whether it's a marketing thing or just a lazy language thing. I'm not too sure. But it's important to really understand the difference about it and make sure that you're clear around what your expectations are from your rental manager, if that's the case, or from your property manager, if it's a little bit more in depth as far as the service level agreement you have with them. So on the basic level, what is your rental responsible for? Well, they're responsible for managing your tenant. Okay, they're not there to manage your property. They're not there to do the maintenance on the property, all of that. So I think it's very important that you're clear on it. The reason you employ a rental manager is because they are the experts in managing tenants. Okay, you as a property investor, unless it is your full-time job and that's all you do every single day, you're not the expert in managing tenants. Whereas someone who is dealing with tenants day in, day out, all day, in the evenings, they're on standby constantly, they're so used to what to deal with when it comes to dealing with tenants. So they become the expert in that space. You as a property investor, you've probably got a day job, so you're the expert in your day job, and that's what people come to you for your services. So in the same way, you need to respect the fact that your rental manager is the expert in their field. So they're up to date on the legislation as far as what can and can't be done around managing tenants, managing leases. So they will be able to give you the right service around that side of things. Why is that important? Because you as a property investor or a property landlord, you can get yourself into a lot of trouble by taking shortcuts, by trying to do things yourself, and you end up getting into trouble around like the legal things, where we have landlords who create spoliation situations and they start trying to harass their tenants to get rent that's behind or late rent. They're cutting off electricity, cutting off water, changing locks on doors, evicting the tenants illegally, versus your rental management manager knows the laws around managing the lease element, managing the tenant, managing collections, what they're allowed to do and what they're supposed to do. So I'm not going to go too deeply into what that process is, and maybe I'll cover it at another stage as far as what the process is for collecting rent, what to do when the tenant is late in paying, do when the tenant is not paying and you now need to evict them. So I'll probably cover the other topic at another date, but it's important to understand from your rental manager's perspective, they are there to look after the tenant relationship. They're there to make sure that that goes as smoothly as possible. So you get paid on time every single month for your rent. Okay. And then they're there, if things don't go well, they're there to manage how to deal with a tenant who's in breach. Okay. So that's the gist of it. The question here is, are they responsible for the maintenance on property? And I think this is something that is debatable, and it all depends on the relationship you have with your rental manager. Some rental managers are phenomenal. They go above and beyond. So I think when you've got one of those rental managers, hang on to them, because they really do make your life so much easier, and it enables you to be able to scale your property portfolio, to get more and more properties, because we have a fantastic rental manager. They make life easier, and you're not having to deal with putting out fires all the time. As far as maintenance goes, the maintenance that they are responsible for is again related to the tenant. So it's related to keeping your tenant happy and your tenant on track. So that would be generally stuff that happens inside the property. So depending on what type of property you have, if it's a standard apartment flat, then it's a lot simpler because it's everything that's inside the unit. The body corporate is responsible for everything outside of the unit. So that makes it a lot easier to understand in that kind of setup. So it means if there's a leaking tap, if there's a broken toilet, if there's fixtures and fittings that aren't working, electrical issues, that sort of thing, the rental manager will assist to make sure that you as the landlord are aware that there's a breakdown, and you can authorize them to go ahead and carry out repairs. So if there's a leaking tap, they can send in a plumber. They don't have to phone you and say, listen, Mr. Landlords, there's a leaking tap, what can I do? You give them the authority to have small jobs sorted out as quickly as possible. The idea there is you give them a budget that they are allowed to work up to, and they can get the go-ahead on that kind of work. Okay, it doesn't mean that they're responsible for all of the maintenance on the property. You, as the property owner, you as the landlord, you are responsible for maintenance on the property. You're responsible for looking after the property as a whole, making sure that property is optimized for you to get the best value out of your tenants. So the best value is the best rental income out of those tenants. Okay, if you cut corners on maintenance, if you cut corners on your fittings, fixtures, and they break down, that's on you because you've been saving costs up front. Bearing in mind that when you save costs up front, sometimes it costs you down the line, and there's a long-term price allocated to that. So you as a landlord, you're responsible for the maintenance. Now, what does that mean? That means that the rental manager is responsible for the tenant, you're responsible for the property. Now you can upgrade this sort of relationship. So that's where you start looking at the idea of a property manager, okay, or a facility manager, or an operations manager. And generally this is something that you need to do when your portfolio is growing a lot bigger. Okay, so when you've got more than one property, when you've got, or should I say more than two properties even, when you've got a bigger property with multiple units on it, so if you've got a small apartment building, if you've got a big block of flats, you then need to start thinking about the property management element of things. It can also come into play around a multi-let, because the rental manager is responsible for each of those tenants inside each granny flat, each bachelor unit, each rental unit. But you as the landlord are responsible for the upkeep of the whole property. So you can then engage the services of a property manager in this space. And we're separating. The rental manager deals with the lease management and the tenant relationship. Now we're talking about the property. So the property management element of it is the facilities, the building, the landscaping, all of that. That needs to be looked after by someone. Okay. So if you are dealing with a conventional rental manager, now's the time, or when you're going through the mandate negotiations, that is the time to make sure that you're covering the expectations around the property management of things. What are you as the property manager going to be providing as services? Are you responsible for making sure that the garden is in good condition, making sure that the gutters are cleared, making sure that any upkeep on the property is looked after, things like utilities management. So often we kind of go like, oh no, my rental manager must look after the utilities management. But that's not really the case. Yes, you can ask them to take responsibility for it, and that comes through to communication. So if you agree on a service, then that service should be provided. Okay, and then you obviously you expect to receive that service. Often it does mean you need to pay a little bit more of a premium for that additional service. So that's up to your negotiation with your rental manager, and obviously trying to get as much of the property management scope done through them. So I think that kind of gives a nice picture of what your rental manager is responsible for versus a property manager. The property manager, that can be built out as you need it on a property. And that's why I say it's probably more conventional in bigger properties. So when you're dealing with a bigger building, a multi-let block of flats, an apartment building, that sort of thing, then you've got more nuts and bolts that are going together. So you as the landlord are responsible for more that's going on around the property. When you have a single family dwelling where it's one tenant living in the whole property, that tenant is responsible for the landscaping, for cutting the grass, for the gardening, for keeping the house up to date as far as basic maintenance goes. So whether there's a dripping tap, they should be sorting that out themselves. Okay, but when it comes to bigger buildings with multiple tenants, now the dynamics change, and you as a landlord are responsible. So it's very good to try and get a property manager in place who's going to specialize in looking after the outside elements of the property. So not the rental manager dealing with the tenant and what's happening inside the unit. You're now dealing with the whole building itself. Okay, and then with your property manager, you need to be paying attention to the ongoing maintenance, so around breakdowns and things that need to be fixed as you go along, and also the planned maintenance. So what is your program as far as 6 months down the line? What are we intending to do as far as maintenance goes? Every year we need to do X. When it comes to painting of buildings, generally painting of buildings should be being refreshed every 7 to 10 years. So it's important to have that budgeted and planned towards. And sit down with your property manager and have that program built out so as A, you as a landlord can budget towards it, and B, that property manager is able to plan it into what's happening on the property. So I think that should help you and give you clarity around the distinction. And I think the moral of the story is really to start from that mandate program. When you're negotiating with your rental manager and your property manager, you're clear on what is expected from them so as you can receive the services that you expect. Don't get frustrated because there hasn't been communication when you haven't taken ownership of that communication. So from the get-go, make sure you negotiate and you're clear on what your services you're expecting to receive. Thank you very much, everyone, joining us. If you are able to like and subscribe to all our channels, that would be great. It obviously helps us continue to give you value. And then also join us every 2 weeks where we go through the facilities management and utilities management. So thank you very much from me at SAP and Prepaid. Chat to you all soon.